The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Now, the book called Unshackled Mind is the story of hope and resilience written by an A&E doctor who endured years as a psychiatric patient. The author joins us now. Welcome to the show, Cathy Wield.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome, Cathy. So, you were diagnosed with treatment-resistant depression. What's that?
Well, in about 1994, I first went to the GP because I had an emotional crisis. Unfortunately, that led to a diagnosis of depression and I was put on medication. From then on, I received numerous drugs and ECT, all sorts, but nothing got better. So when things don't get better, they call you treatment-resistant depression.
Oh,
does that explain it?
It does, and I think that must be awful for you. I mean, ECT, that's quite drastic, and even that didn't work.
That's right, even brain surgery.
Wow. So did they just say to you, well, you've got to live with this then?
No. So after the brain surgery, I had a transient sort of recovery. I actually went back to work. So I'd had 7 years of continuous psychiatric treatment. Then I had this sort of recovery for a little while, and then, of course, it all came back. But the point was that having been given this diagnosis and treatment, I believed, as did the doctors, that this was very biological because, you know, the myth of the chemical imbalance was very much in vogue at that time. So once I had what they thought was relapse, because actually I'd never dealt with the original problems and the drugs had horrendous side effects. I was then told I would never get better, that I would be on the drugs for life, that I'd be subject to relapses recurrently, and that I'd never work again. So at that point, yes, I was kind of told, this is the way it is.
That's awful because it makes you feel like it's a hopeless situation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, I did believe that for a while, but then fortunately I started to rebel against this and I started to take myself off some of the drugs. And lo and behold, I started to get better.
Now, I assume you slowly took yourself off the drugs. You didn't just stop
very
them.
much so. No. It's very, very important for your listeners to know that to stop these psychiatric drugs precipitously is a very bad idea. You can get some terrible withdrawal effects. So it actually took me several years to get off them fully. And at that time, we'd actually moved to America temporarily. I had been back to work, but I met a therapist who listened to my story. And for the first time, she was somebody who said, hold on a minute, what you're telling me about your past, no wonder you were feeling like that. That was back in 94. No wonder you had a crisis at that time. And actually what subsequently followed was probably re-traumatizing you and bringing up those very issues which you had been trying so hard to process.
Oh dear. It sounds like if you'd have had, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but if you'd have had counselling at the time, you might have got better quickly. But because you kept doing all these different things, you became, like you say, more traumatized.
Exactly. And I'm not trying to blame anybody. It is part of the system. I was given psychotherapy at the time, but by then I was on a huge number of drugs, very sedated, and they do numb your emotions. So it's very difficult to process things well. And the other thing was that because my childhood adverse events were related to my time at boarding school, I was felt to be one of these privileged little rich kids, I think. So actually, they weren't taken seriously.
No, there can't be any blame because everybody's situation is different. You know, antidepressants and other medications can help for some people, but clearly it wasn't right for you.
No, it definitely wasn't right for me. And of course, at that time, there was no publicity given to the fact that with some people, they can make you suicidal, and that's what happened to me. And I think nobody realized. I certainly didn't. So, you know, when I was getting worse rather than better, then the response was to actually give me more and higher doses.
Oh, blimey.
So I ended up in this horrendous kind of cycle of treatment, which wasn't actually helping me to deal with the problems.
And you even had brain surgery.
I did, yes. I mean, so by that stage, I'd been, had this diagnosis or with these symptoms for almost 7 years. No, I think it was 7 years by then. And they felt that my case was so hopeless that I would possibly die. So I was referred for this brain surgery. And the remarkable thing about that was it was never meant to be a cure. It was the goal was that I should live outside of hospital because by then I was sectioned and permanently hospitalized. But actually what happened was truly remarkable. And the doctors at the time did not put it down to the surgery. I had a weird experience that kind of took me out of myself. I had a light. It felt like a physical light switch on in my head. And so, as I say, it took me into this transitory period of a few years, literally under 5 years, when I was relatively well.
Well, it sounds like a really scary situation. So when I think you said you met the psychiatrist in America, is that correct?
Counselor, therapist,
sorry.
not a psychiatrist.
Right.
No, by then I had realised that actually psychiatry wasn't helping me. The drugs weren't helping me. So I was coming off them. I was finding my own way. But I took myself to a therapist in the US, private, just to help me with the situation that I found myself in there. And, on my first visit there, she said, tell me something about yourself. And I said, I don't need to talk about the past because I've been told that what happened to me, this depression, has nothing to do with my childhood. And of course, that piqued her interest. And she wanted to know more. And the minute I started talking about it, her jaw dropped. And she said, what do you mean they told you it had nothing to do with this depression? I came away from there sort of reeling, really, thinking, oh my goodness, do you mean to say I've been through all this? And actually, it really wasn't depression. It was all reaction to what happened that had been triggered at that time in my life. The memories had been triggered. So, that was the start, really, of my recovery journey, or at least a significant step along the way.
Yeah, it's a shocking story. So did you then have regular sessions with this therapist, and did she help you? Yes, I did. Yeah. Wow.
Yes, she did help me. We got so far, and then because she was attached to the church, and actually at the time I was also unraveling everything to do with, I'd had, some bad experiences in that setting. I then, finished with her. And when we returned to this country, I found another counsellor here in the UK. And she really helped me to sort of, I suppose, just get through the rest of it, really, sort of sort out what had happened, why I had developed a kind of survival personality to deal with what happened to me as a child, and how it hadn't helped me as an adult. So, it has been a journey. I've learned a lot. And now I really want to make sure that anybody else who has emotional distress, which is very real, nothing that I experienced was pleasant. It was an absolute nightmare, but it is possible to recover. And I think that's the take-home message.
Definitely.
But, sometimes we rely on medicine. We think that's the answer, and actually it doesn't fix you. That most of the fixing came from me. I fixed myself with the help of therapists. Other things, dancing, drama, whatever takes your fancy. But also finding a community of other people who'd suffered in the same way, both through their boarding school experiences and those who've also had a bad time by being treated medically by the traditional psychiatric method. That being around these people has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it always helps if you at least don't feel alone, if you know other people that have been through what you've been through.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting because as a child and certainly as an adult, I thought I was the only one. I was not aware that other people had found, their boarding school experience difficult, even though I now know that even people in my class did. And then, as later on as a doctor, there was stigma, but what I didn't really understand was that other people who'd also had lots of drugs, lots of hospitalization, lots of ECT, etc., had also found that it wasn't the answer and it made the situation worse. And as you've rightly said, that's not true for everyone. But I think it is really important that people actually find out what's right for them.
Yeah, for sure. And at what point did you become a doctor because of this, or were you a doctor previously anyway?
I was a doctor. Straight from school, age 17, I went to medical school. And I didn't work until in my 30s because I had children. I had a child at medical school and then they were growing up. So I went into it quite late. So I was a doctor by the time I had the reaction. And actually that was part of it, the distress, because I was working 120 hours a week. I had 4 children. Suddenly, I was reminded of my boarding school experience and all those memories were triggered. So I had a lot of reasons for having the crisis at that time.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it was, here are these wonderful pills. They'll make you better quick, and that was the start of the difficulties.
Yeah, well, thank goodness you did get the help that you need and you're feeling better now. It's a very important story to share. The book is called Unshackled Mind, A Doctor's Story of Trauma, and it's by Cathy Wield, who we're speaking to now. Are you still in America, Cathy, or are you back in the UK?
No, I'm back in the UK. I've been here since 2019.
Is it cold at the moment?
No, it's sunny. It is cold, I guess, but it's actually quite sunny, which is unusual for us.
Well, it's been lovely to chat to you. Thanks for being on the show.
That's a pleasure.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.